She has a name. You'll never know it. Rome made sure of that. Right now, 50,000 Romans are filing out of the greatest arena ever built, laughing, wiping blood-spattered fingers on linen, arguing about which gladiator performed best today. Children are imitating killing moves on the walk home. Vendors are packing up honeyed figs they sold during the executions at noon. And somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the sand, beneath the machinery, beneath 6 levels of stone corridors, she is waiting in a cell she will never leave. She hears them before she sees anything. The door doesn't open slowly. It opens like a verdict. Here's what no history class has ever shown you. This wasn't an accident of conquest. This wasn't the chaos of war spilling over into darkness. This was designed, budgeted, staffed, architecturally planned. The Roman state built specific chambers beneath their arenas for a specific purpose, and then they wrote it into their administrative records with the same calm efficiency they used to log road construction. I've spent weeks cross-referencing sources most historians consider too disturbing to teach. Roman satirists, military administrative records, and most damningly, the archaeology itself. What I found isn't theory. The evidence is literally bolted into the walls. And when you see what archaeologists found beneath the Colosseum and beneath Capua, the very city where Spartacus launched his rebellion, you won't be able to look at ancient Rome the same way again. Stay with me, because this story gets significantly darker before it makes any sense. To understand what happened in those underground chambers, you first have to understand the single most chilling sentence in all of Roman law. A conquered person was not a person. Under the formal legal classification system of the Roman Republic and Empire, war captives, men, women, children seized during conquest, were designated res, not homo, not persona, res, things. The same Latin word Romans used for a table, a cart, a piece of timber. A conquered Germanic woman who had been a mother, a daughter, a community leader 2 weeks ago was now, legally, the same category as a chair. You could do anything to her, damage her, destroy her, transfer her to someone else, because you cannot commit a crime against property. But here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. Rome didn't invent this concept out of cruelty. They invented it out of efficiency. When Roman legions crushed a rebellion in Gaul or burned a city in Judea, or swept through Britannia after Boudicca's forces were annihilated, they didn't pause to think about what to do with the surviving civilians. They had a system. Men of fighting age, mines or arenas, life expectancy measured in months. Children under 10, Eastern slave markets. They'd never see their homeland again. Most didn't survive the journey. Women of childbearing age, captiva, property of the state, transported under guard. Logged in ledgers by officials called commentariances, bureaucrats whose entire job was tracking human inventory. Each woman received a number, a category based on origin, Germanica, Britannica, Parthica, not a name, a label. The journey to Rome was already a descent through multiple hells. You'd watched your village burn. You'd seen your children pulled in one direction while you were yanked in another, their screaming fading as the distance grew. You'd been chained to strangers, marched hundreds of miles, stripped, examined like livestock at transfer points, assigned a value. And then you were taken somewhere that had been built specifically for you, the hypogeum. From the Greek, under the earth. 6 levels of tunnels, corridors, holding cells, mechanical elevators and staging areas directly beneath the arena floor. An entire underground city designed to feed this spectacle above. Most of what happens down here, history remembers clearly. Animal cages, gladiator preparation rooms, the hydraulic lifts that could raise a full-grown lion to arena level in under a minute. But not all of the chambers had an obvious purpose. When 19th century archaeologists first seriously excavated beneath the Colosseum, they were expecting engineering marvels. They found those, but they also found something they hadn't planned for. A set of chambers. Small, isolated, located away from the animal quarters and the gladiator areas that didn't fit any of the standard operational categories, roughly 10 to 15 square meters each. Stone benches built at a very specific height along the walls. Heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron, doors that lock from the outside, and the detail that made modern archaeologists physically uncomfortable when they documented it, iron rings, anchored directly into the stone walls. Multiple rings, at floor level, at waist height, at shoulder height. The rings haven't rusted through, they're still there. The same construction pattern, isolated chambers, external locks, anchored rings, appears beneath the amphitheatre at Capua, at Pompeii, at amphitheatres across the empire from North Africa to the British Isles. This wasn't a regional quirk. This was standardized infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't get standardized unless it's being used repeatedly, consistently, by design. Now you need to understand the men walking into those corridors. Gladiators existed in a contradiction. Rome never fully resolved, and that contradiction made them simultaneously the most controlled and most dangerous humans in the empire. Legally, less than human, classified alongside slaves and condemned criminals. A gladiator had fewer rights than a stray dog in Rome's legal framework. Culturally, absolute gods. Ancient graffiti preserved at Pompeii, the same graffiti that survived the volcanic ash for 2,000 years, calls one gladiator the sigh of the girls, another the glory of the ladies. Aristocratic women paid enormous bribes to guards for private access to gladiator barracks. A gladiator named Sergius, enslaved, legally subhuman, allegedly conducted multiple simultaneous affairs with married women from Rome's most powerful families. Their sweat was bottled and sold. I'm not being metaphorical. Gladiator perspiration was collected after fights, mixed with olive oil and mineral earth, and marketed as an aphrodisiac beauty product to the upper classes. The very women who attended the games, who watched these men kill and be killed, would later rub gladiator sweat on their skin as a luxury treatment. Think about what that tells you about the psychology of the crowd watching them. But beneath the celebrity worship, Rome was operating from a place of deep, unhealed trauma. 73 BC. 78 gladiators escaped a training facility at Capua. Within 18 months, they had raised an army of 70,000. For 2 years, Spartacus and his forces humiliated Rome's professional legions, armies that had conquered the known world, in battle after battle. When Rome finally ended it, they crucified 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, one body every 40 meters. For 200 kilometers, a forest of crosses stretching from Rome to Capua. Decomposing in the sun for months, as a message, their memory never left the Roman psyche. Every senator who funded games, every lanista who ran a gladiator school, every spectator in the stands, they all carried the knowledge that these men had once come terrifyingly close to burning Rome to the ground. So here is the question Rome had to answer. Every single day for centuries, how do you control incredibly dangerous, deeply traumatized men with professional killing skills and legitimate grievances without triggering another Spartacus? The answer was a system of calculated rewards, extra food, prize money, the promise of freedom after enough victories. But the sources, scattered, vague, deliberately understated, hint at something else. Something more primal than money. The term victoria carnalis, carnal victory, doesn't appear in classical Roman sources. Modern historians coined it to describe what Roman writers themselves documented so casually they didn't think it needed a special name. Because to them, it wasn't remarkable. It was operational. What the sources, Martial, Juvenal, Seneca, and several administrative fragments, describe when you read them together is a reward system attached to the gladiatorial games in which men who survived and performed impressively were granted what the texts vaguely call privileges of the victor. Modern historians cross-referencing these references with Roman military reward culture, slave management documentation, and the physical archaeology have concluded, uncomfortably but consistently, that these privileges included access to the captive women held in those specialized chambers beneath the arena. The process, based on pieced-together evidence, appears to have been almost aggressively bureaucratic. A ludus official, an arena administrator, would accompany the gladiator, still in armor, still carrying the blood of the afternoon. Through oil lamp corridors, past the animal cages still reeking of blood and feces, past mechanical lifts being winched down for cleaning, past gladiators who hadn't fought today sitting in silence, to a specific section of the hypogeum. The administrator carried a wax tablet, names, numbers, origins, conditions, the same type of inventory record Rome used to log grain shipments or equipment stores. A commentariensis would have updated this record regularly, noting availability, status, any changes to the inventory. A guard would unlock a cell. One Roman writer, unnamed, preserved only in later quotation, described the philosophy underlying this system with a sentence so matter-of-fact it's almost more disturbing than anything explicit. The victor claims his prize in the same manner the empire claims its provinces, by right of conquest. That sentence was written as a compliment. Now we enter the hardest part of this story. Not because the evidence becomes unclear, it actually becomes more specific here, but because the specific evidence is not written by generals or emperors. It is scratched into stone by fingernails. When archaeologists excavated the Hypogeum beneath the amphitheater at Capua, remember Capua, the exact city where Spartacus launched his revolt, they found writing on cell walls, not graffiti from gladiators, not administrative markings, writing in multiple languages, Latin, Celtic, what appears to be Aramaic, written in styles that indicate the writers were not professionally educated, written close to the floor or in corners where someone small or crouching might have pressed their hand against stone in the dark. Most fragments are too damaged to reconstruct, but several survive. One, in crude Latin with phonetic errors suggesting it was written by a non-native speaker, translates as, "I was Amelia of the Brigantes. I watched my children taken. Now I am nothing." Another, in what linguists have identified as a Celtic dialect from Britannia, "To any god who listens, let me die before tomorrow." MC9. These aren't the voices history preserves. Roman chronicles track emperors and architects, military campaigns and legal innovations. They don't record the name of a Brigantian woman assigned a number in a ledger beneath the Roman arena, but she recorded herself, in stone, with her fingers, in the dark, and the stone kept it. While those women were in those cells, Rome's most celebrated poets were describing the arena's horrors as entertainment reviews. Marcus Valerius Martiali was the empire's most read epigrammatist. His work was the viral content of ancient Rome. His books sold throughout the empire. Emperors quoted him at banquets. In his Livis Spectacularum, written to celebrate the Colosseum's opening, Martial describes the midday shows, what historians call fatal charades, with the tone of a man reviewing a restaurant he found pleasantly surprising. He describes a prisoner dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician whose playing could calm any creature, led into the arena with a lyre. A bear released. Martial notes, almost disappointed that this time the music didn't work. The bear killed the man. The crowd ate honeyed dates. In another passage, and I'm not going to soften this, Martial describes a condemned woman forced to publicly reenact the myth of Pasiphae, the queen who mated with a sacred bull. For this prisoner, the reenactment was literal, in front of 50,000 people, until she died from her injuries. Martial writes this as a compliment to the organizers' creativity. He praises the efficiency of the system, the ingenuity of the staging. "Whatever myth tells us," he writes, "the arena makes real." That sentence was carved into the cultural identity of the greatest civilization the Western world had produced at that point. The civilization that gave us concrete, running water, representative government, the concept of civil law. The same civilization that designed a system where human beings were tortured to death as lunchtime filler between the main gladiatorial events. And the senators brought their children. The vendors sold snacks. The poets wrote rave reviews. For all its bureaucratic cruelty, Rome was obsessed with a specific fiction about itself. The empire saw its role as bringing civilitas, civilization, to the barbaric world. This wasn't just propaganda for the conquered. Romans genuinely believed it. It was the psychological architecture that let senators sleep at night while approving entertainment budgets that included live human executions. Which is why what happened in Antioch in 200 AD terrified the Roman establishment. Emperor Septimius Severus was attending games. On the program, female gladiators, gladiatresses. Rare, controversial, legally ambiguous, but occasionally featured. The Greek audience watched with the solemnity they'd extend to any combat. Focused, respectful of the skill. The Roman spectators, Cassius Dio, who was present, records this directly, jeered, shouted sexual commentary, laughed. They treated the event not as combat but as obscenity, a spectacle of a different, lower kind. Severus was reportedly furious. Not, and this distinction is critical, not because women were being subjected to arena violence. Female captives were still at that moment held in chambers beneath this very arena. That was fine. That continued. He was furious because the Roman crowd's reaction had exposed the machinery. The public conflation of violence and sexual dominance had made visible what was supposed to operate only in the darkness of the Hypogeum. The fiction of civilitas required that certain horrors remain invisible, administrative, quiet. So Severus banned women from gladiatorial combat entirely. The abuse didn't stop. It just returned to the shadows where Rome had always preferred it. The system continued. For decades. For centuries. Even after Constantine converted the empire to Christianity in the early 4th century, the games persisted. Even after bishop condemned them. Even after the theological arguments against spectacle violence became part of official doctrine. The last recorded gladiatorial combat didn't occur until 404 AD, when a monk named Telemachus leapt into the arena to physically stop a fight and was torn apart by the crowd. Only then did Emperor Honorius permanently ban gladiatorial games, 404 AD, 4 centuries after the Colosseum opened. But even that didn't end the captive system. It didn't end because of moral progress. It ended because the Roman Empire collapsed. The machinery of conquest stopped functioning. The supply of captives dried up. The institution died from logistical failure, not from conscience. Today, roughly 6 million tourists visit the Colosseum every year. They photograph the arches. They marvel at the engineering. They buy guidebooks about gladiatorial combat, about the emperors who funded the games, about the architectural innovations that made the Hypogeum's elevator system possible. Most never go below the main level. Most never stand in one of those small chambers with the external locks and the iron rings. Most never notice the scratch marks on certain walls, still visible, still preserved beneath centuries of accumulated dust and tourism infrastructure, where someone pressed their fingers against stone and tried to leave proof that they had existed. The commentariensis ledgers that recorded women as numbered inventory items, sorted by origin, assessed for condition, assigned to logistics chains, those documents still exist. Some are in Vatican archives, some in museums across Europe, available to anyone with research access and enough Latin to read the bureaucratic categories that once described human beings as property categories. The ledgers survived. The names did not. The graffiti survived. The women who scratched it did not. The iron rings survived. The people they held did not. We talk about the Roman Empire as though it was primarily a story of architecture and governance, of military genius and legal innovation, of roads and aqueducts and the foundations of Western civilization. And it was all of those things. It was also a civilization that perfected, over centuries, with genuine administrative creativity, the industrial processing of human beings into objects, not as a side effect, not as a tragic failure of an otherwise admirable system, as the system, the spectacle on the sand, the gladiatorial combat, the animal hunts, the fatal charades. That was the half Rome wanted you to see. The half it advertised on city walls, funded with public money, attended with pride. The other half happened in chambers with external locks and iron rings in the moments after the last torch burned down. She had a name. Rome didn't record it, but she did, in stone, in the dark, with her hands. Here is the question this history actually demands, not how could Rome do this, because the mechanics are painfully clear. Dehumanized through law, institutionalized through infrastructure, normalized through spectacle. Reward the enforcers. Ignore the victims because they aren't legally people. The real question is, how many systems throughout history have operated on exactly that same 4-step template? The dehumanization wasn't unique to Rome. The bureaucratization of cruelty, the wax tablets, the numbered categories, the administrative language that turned people into ledger entries, is a human pattern that appears and reappears across civilizations and centuries with disturbing consistency. What changes is the vocabulary. What doesn't change is the architecture. The iron rings are always there. They just don't always look like iron rings. The stones remember everything Rome tried to erase. The only question is whether we're willing to listen. If this investigation uncovered history you've never encountered before, the kind they deliberately left out of textbooks, then you already know what to do. Hit subscribe to the History and Fact right now. Turn on every notification, because this channel exists for exactly one reason: to find the history that the powerful decided you didn't need to know, and to tell it with all the evidence intact. Like this video if you believe that the people history forgot, the ones who scratched their names in stone because no chronicler would write them down, deserve to be remembered. Drop your location in the comments. Tell me, what part of this disturbed you most? I'll be reading every one. The next investigation is already in progress, and I promise you, it's worse than this one.